right after I left Africa, I went and I investigated another.
That's wild.
I know. I went and investigated another UFO landing case at a school. In this case, was Westall, and it occurred in April of 1966.
Okay.
But there were like all over 300 witnesses to this case.
300 witnesses.
Over 300, including
and this
a
is
science
a school
professor.
in
Australia.
Okay.
Outside Melbourne.
Okay.
Westall, I think it was Westall Primary or something. But it's called the Westall Incident, 1966. So I was just in Africa, okay? And I had some of these drawings with me. And I was just kind of sharing them a little bit, you know. And
it looks very much like the classic alien, spindly neck, long neck with big head and big eyes.
So anyway, so I'm kind of sharing this, and I had someone say, bloody hell, I mean, like, that looks just like the Wandjina. I said, the Wandjina? He said, yeah, the Wandjina from their 4,000-year-old cave paintings here in Australia. So I looked up Wandjina, and I don't know if look at that on the upper right hand.
4,000-year-old rock art.
Yeah, so click on that one on the upper right if you can, the big one. Yeah. And I just have to remind your audience, this is 4,000 years old. I mean, hello. Do you see some resemblance? I mean,
yeah.
It's kind of crazy, right?
They look exactly the same.
That's what I'm saying. It was spooky to see that. The resemblance. I mean, these are children in 1994.
It looks like a snake slithering in between all these heads of these creatures. For people that are not watching and only listening, there are these 4,000-year-old cave rock paintings from Australia, and these heads look like the traditional UFO heads with the big eyes, the big head, the spindly bodies, and there looks like a snake slithering through it. Two tall, skinny-looking beings off in the background. And a bird,
Anyway, it's just, I mean, could that possibly be a coincidence? I mean, I don't know, man, but that was just, and there's obviously.
And these are apparently in some caves, and how do they date it to 4,000 years ago?
That you're going to have to talk to, specialists, because I don't know, but that's, according to everyone I talked to, these are thousands of years old,
right?
On cave paintings in Australia. In fact, I almost went to one of them. And in fact, next time I go to Australia, I'm going to go and look at some of this stuff, because it's just like, oh, look, I don't know which one that is. That's interesting. I mean, it's just the big eyes, that shaped head. It's just fascinating stuff. And I think this is like the historical, for your audience listening or even watching, you can check out there's a book that's put out by Jacques Vallée, and it's called Wonders in the Sky. And he documents ancient sightings, whether it's cave art or paintings or coins,
historical paintings,
historical
Renaissance
stuff.
paintings.
It's fascinating. It's called
depicting UFOs,
depicting which cannot be interpreted as anything other than UFOs. Anyway, there's one drawing that I brought in this briefing document that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, you can pull that one up, Jordan. I think you have that.
Yeah,
what we were looking at earlier.
Painting the Madonna. It's in a
right there.
Yeah, there you go. So
the Madonna with Saint Giovanni. Yeah, there's lots of these old Renaissance and paintings from like the times of antiquity with religious depictions of Madonna and Jesus and the Virgin Mary with strange objects in the background. And I think this one shows a guy looking up at it in the sky.
If you can click on that, and if you zoomed in, you could see there's a guy standing there with a dog, and they're looking up at it. So can we go back to Australia?
Yes.
This Westall UFO case.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Australia right after Africa, and I was fascinated because it's so hard for me as a researcher to imagine how a mass sighting like a school, could happen in broad daylight and that the whole world wouldn't know about it. I just have a really hard time wondering, how is that possible? Do you know what I mean? So I started investigating, well, with the help of a number of Australians, researchers, and there was a guy who was 12 miles or less, 8 miles away from the school. It was 2 days prior. Usually when there's a UFO sighting, there's always a couple of days lead up to whether it's a big event like a landing or something. It's almost like they're kind of casing the joint. I don't know. You'll always, there's UFO activity on a big mass sighting, usually for a few days before it does something. There was a guy that was about, like I said, 8-10 miles away. His name was James Kibble. He'd never come forward ever. He was out in his garden with a Polaroid. It was, I want to say, April 4th. I'd have to look at the exact, but it was like April 4th, 1966. And he wanted to share the progress of the flowering garden at his mother's place. So he had his Polaroid camera out there, and then he saw something glinting in the sky that caught his eye. And he looked up and he saw this disc that was, according to the witness, James Kibble, he's deceased now. He sent this to me. This is a direct scan of his.
He mailed that to you?
He mailed this to me, yeah. So it's descending like this. And yeah, please. And it's descending like this. And then all the witnesses at the school that saw this object take off, they said it was a disc and it went like this. It goes up like this on its side, and then it shoots up straight up in the air. Well, that, according to James Kibble, is the disc that flipped up horizontally like this before it shot off. A moment later, he said it was like a bullet leaving a gun shot out of there. Now, I'll share some interesting aspect with your audience, and that is, if you ever see a UFO photograph with crystal clear defined edges, it's probably a fake. They don't know why, but there's something to do with the propulsion, they're guessing,
right,
that causes the edges to blur ever so slightly. Like if you look at a legitimate, bona fide, good photograph that has been like scrutinized to death, like 1950 McMinnville, Oregon, or 1964, 65, the UFO worker that snapped off 3 or 4 Polaroids. I'm looking at his face right now. It'll come to me in a second, but you'll see that the edges are slightly blurred. And according to witnesses or specialists that I've talked to, that's a pretty good indicator. That coupled with the testimony of the person that shot it. Santa Ana, Rex Heflin, 1965, he shot, I think, 3 or 4 Polaroids. And the edges, great pictures, points of reference, broad daylight, light reflecting off the object, fantastic. If you zoomed in on it, on the originals, the edges are slightly blurred, just like this one. But this is like a metallic structured object that went from this position to this position and then shot off at high-rate speed.
Well, it's interesting. That's exactly how Bob Lazar described those things flying when he was on S4 testing those crafts.
I learned about that later on, and you talk to the witnesses. I'd never talked to, prior to Australia, I'd never talked to someone who described it. I mean, this thing was sitting on the ground when the kids ran up to it, okay? Sitting on the ground, right there, broad daylight. It lifted off, got like 20 feet up, and then it flipped on its side, and then that's when it rocketed off.
That's what the kids described?
That's what the kids described, yes. So
yeah, Bob
that's what this guy who snapped a picture of it, this is it in that position right before he said, a moment later it shot off. I said, describe the acceleration to me. He said like it was being shot out of a gun. Bang, gone.
Yep. The pilots described it, the pilots that saw it off the coast of San Diego explained it like if you put a ping pong ball into a cup and you shook the cup.
Yeah.
That's how the motion was.
And
then Bob described him flying belly first, like when they did the test flights.